I arrived at my granddaughter Madison's birthday party holding a small gift I had wrapped myself. The brownstone in Manhattan's Upper West Side was filled with elegant white orchids or its soft jazz servers in black vests. I hadn't been invited as much as I had been expected. That subtle difference had been growing louder over the years. "Grandma Elaine is here," my son David announced to the room without looking up from his phone. The way he said it, as if the weather had shifted slightly mildly inconvenient, but nothing to stop the party over. I clutched the box in my hands a little tighter. Inside were two handmade dolls, one of Madison in a wedding gown, the other of her fiancé, Chase, in a tuxedo. I had spent 3 weeks knitting them, my fingers sore and swollen from arthritis. What no one else knew was that inside Madison's doll, carefully sewn into the center of its chest, was a diamond that had been in our family for 3 generations. George, my late husband, had it reset for our 50th anniversary. Madison had hinted about it more than once. When it was time for presents, my daughter-in-law, Claire, tapped her glass. "Madison, darling, start with the smaller ones." Madison's eyes landed on mine and the package in my hands. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stepped forward and handed it to her. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She took it with 2 manicured fingers, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. Chase stood across the room, watching with the same expression he might use to evaluate a wine list. Madison unwrapped the box. A hush settled over the room. She lifted the dolls, holding them away from her cream-colored dress like they were something dug up from a dusty attic. "This handmade gift looks so cheap," she announced loudly, with a sharp laugh that bounced off the marble walls. Then came the rest: Chase's chuckle, David's too loud bark, Claire's polite titter, and a wave of laughter from people who didn't know me, didn't care to. I stood there burning, unable to move, the doll with the diamond hanging between her fingertips like an insult. That night, I returned to my apartment alone. I didn't turn on the lights. The quiet felt like company after what had happened. I sat in front of my laptop and opened my email. The subject line read, "Final venue confirmation, Whitmore Beach House." Attached were contracts from the wedding planner, florists, and caterers, all requiring my signature and payment. The venue listed: my beloved home in East Hampton, the same house George and I had bought 4 decades ago, the place where we spent our summers, raised our children, and where I had scattered his ashes beneath the cherry tree, overlooking the sea. Madison's message was short. "We've already sent out the invitations. Renovations start next month. Your old furniture will need to go." Not a question, not a request, a declaration. My hand trembled as I closed the laptop. I glanced at the keys to the beach house, still resting on the nightstand. George's initials were engraved into the brass keyring. My chest ached not from the humiliation of earlier, but from this cruel clarity. They didn't just want to use the house. They wanted to erase me from it. The next morning I received a message from David. "Mom, Claire found a great retirement community in Connecticut. We scheduled a visit next week just to look." I deleted it without replying. From my bedroom window, I could see the Manhattan skyline glinting in the morning sun. How many decisions had been made in those towers that shaped people's lives without their consent? Was I just another person to be managed? I didn't know where the thought came from, but I stood up, grabbed my purse and the beach house keys, and left without brushing my hair. The drive to East Hampton took longer than usual. My fingers ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly, but I needed to see it, one last time, before they stripped it bare and turned it into a wedding showroom. As I pulled into the driveway, there was already a sleek black SUV parked outside. I didn't recognize it. I stepped out, my legs trembling not with age, but with something else. A quiet fury. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and heard voices echoing from the great room, the heart of the house where George had loved to play his old jazz records on Sunday mornings. "The wall between the kitchen and dining area can definitely come down," a woman said. "She won't mind. Mrs. Whitmore's barely here anyway." I walked into the room. There stood Madison, Claire, and a woman holding a digital tablet. My daughter-in-law wore her usual composed smile. Madison, perched on the edge of the counter, looked like she owned the place. The designer wore heels too high for a construction site and a tone too casual for someone speaking about my home. "Actually," I said quietly, "I do mind." All 3 turned. Claire recovered first. "Elaine, what a lovely surprise."
"We're just discussing small updates for the wedding." "Taking down a load-bearing wall isn't a small update," I said, placing my purse firmly on the granite island. Who approved these changes? Madison stepped forward with a syrupy smile. Grandma, we talked about this last Christmas. You said we could use the house and make it perfect for the ceremony. I said you could use it. I never agreed to renovation. It's not demolition, the designer cut in as though speaking to a child. It's modernization. The property has wonderful bones, but the aesthetic is dated. I turned toward the large window facing the ocean, the same view George and I had stared at during our morning coffee for years. White walls, minimalist furniture, the designer continued flipping through slides. Instagram ready, Hampton's chick. Then I saw it. The mantle where a photo of George and me used to sit was bare. In its place was a printed vision board, full of beige swatches and mood lighting. Where's my photograph? I asked. Claire looked around vaguely. Oh, we carefully packed some personal items to keep them safe during the updates. That night after they left, I went to the garage. 3 cardboard boxes labeled Elaine's. Things sat in the corner. Inside, I found the photo, our anniversary album, George's books, and the 2 knitted dolls Madison had mocked, tossed on top like junk. The diamond was still inside. My phone rang. David. Mom, about the retirement place, we really should talk. And about the house, Claire, and I think it's best to move it into a family trust, just for tax purposes. I stared at the brochure on the kitchen table. Seaside Serenity, where independence meets assistance. They were already preparing for a life without me in it. The next day, I met Joan, my oldest friend, for lunch at our usual cafe near Central Park. Joan had never remarried after losing her husband. Men are like pastries, she always said, delicious but not essential for survival. She listened silently as I told her everything: Madison's party, the beach house plans, the trust, the brochures for retirement communities. When I finished, Joan didn't say anything right away. She put down her fork and looked me in the eye. Elaine, this isn't just rude. This is a hostile takeover. I blinked. I plinked. They're maneuvering to control your life, your assets, and your choices, and you're letting them. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend them, but I couldn't because she was right. Later that week, I had a checkup with Dr. Levine, my cardiologist. He reviewed my chart, frowning. Your blood pressure is up significantly since your last visit. Any unusual stress lately? I laughed. Define unusual. He folded his hands. Elaine, at your age, stress is dangerous. I've seen too many patients land in the hospital after family conflicts. It's not just unpleasant, it can be fatal. His words sat with me like a weight. I'd survived breast cancer. I'd survived George's death. I'd survived raising a family through decades of change. Was I really going to let a group of spoiled relatives be the thing that took me down? On the way home, I walked past a small neighborhood bank, the same one where George and I had kept our safe deposit box. I hadn't been inside in years. Inside the box, everything was still there. Our marriage license, birth certificates, George's rare coin collection, and documents the rest of the family didn't know existed: insurance policies, account passwords, and the original deed to the beach house. That evening, my grandson Tyler called. Grandma, are you okay? You left the party kind of suddenly. I assured him I was fine. He hesitated. Dad left some papers in the printer at home. I saw investment statements, a second mortgage, credit card balances. I think they're in trouble financially. My grip on the phone tightened. As we spoke, I logged into my bank account. 3 failed login attempts had been made in the past week from an unrecognized device. So this wasn't just about the house, or a wedding, or even appearances. This was about desperation dressed up as family concern. I'd been on the defensive for too long. It was time to stop reacting and start responding. The next morning, I called George's old friend, Marcus Aldridge, an estate attorney known for his discretion. We hadn't spoken in years, but when he heard my voice, he said, Elaine, what's wrong? We met that afternoon at a quiet cafe tucked away from the busy avenues. Marcus looked older with more gray in his beard, but his eyes were still sharp. I laid it all out for him: the party, the house, the trust proposal, the financial red flags Tyler had uncovered, the attempted account logins. George would be appalled, he said. He expected better from David, I replied. Marcus reviewed the paperwork Tyler had emailed me. He spread out statements, mortgage documents, and bank alerts across the table. They're in deep trouble, he said. Second mortgage, credit card debt, failed investments. If you don't act fast, Elaine, they'll try to force decisions that serve them, not you. What do I do? First, secure your account. Second, confirm that all properties remain in your name alone. They do, I said. George insisted on that. Smart man, Marcus nodded. And third, he hesitated, then leaned forward. About the wedding. Do you still want to host it? I thought of the photo frame replaced with a mood board, of my gift discarded without a glance, of the assumptions that I would pay, accommodate, disappear. No, I said, I want to sell the house. He looked at me, surprised, then nodded. That's a definitive choice, but you'll need to move fast and quietly. That evening, I called Danielle Carter, a private real estate agent Marcus recommended. I need a buyer, I told her. For the East Hampton house, someone who values privacy and can close quickly. Danielle paused. That's a prime property, Mrs. Whitmore, but most beachfront listings take months. This one won't, I said. Not if we keep it off market and discreet. She agreed to scout options and promised to call within a week. The next day, I returned to the beach house alone. I walked through every room, touching the walls, the window frames, the oak banister George had sanded himself. I gathered the photo albums, George's books, and the wooden box that held a portion of his ashes. On the kitchen counter, I noticed a schedule for tent placement left by Madison's wedding planner. I folded it, placed it in the trash, and stared out the window. The sea was calm. I wasn't. But I was ready. The call came sooner than expected. Mrs. Whitmore, Danielle said, her voice brisk, I've found a serious buyer, a tech entrepreneur and his wife. They're prepared to offer full asking price and can close in 40 days sooner if needed, but they request total privacy. Tell them yes, I replied without hesitation. We scheduled professional photos for the listing, but only after I had time to clear out anything personal. That evening, I packed late into the night. The house was quiet, filled only with the sound of tape pulling and cardboard flaps folding shut. I left behind the decor Madison had already chosen her fabric swatches and paint samples taped to my bedroom wall like they belonged there. I took only what mattered, George's ashes, our anniversary albums, the photograph from the mantel, and the dolls. As I was locking the front door, headlights approached. A silver sedan stopped behind my car. Out stepped a woman with a clipboard. Mrs. Whitmore, she asked, looking surprised to see me. I'm here from Evermore Events, just doing a quick layout check for the wedding tent. No need, I said calmly. The wedding plans have changed. The look on her face told me Madison hadn't told her yet. Good. Back in the city, Tyler joined me for dinner. Over roast chicken, his childhood favorite, I shared the news. I'm selling the beach house, I told him. His fork froze mid-air. Before the wedding, I nodded. The closing will be before the date they planned. They're going to lose their minds. Probably, I said. But it's my property. And they lost the right to assume anything when they stopped treating me like family. He was quiet for a moment, then smiled. You know what's strange, Grandma? I think I respect you more now than I ever have. And I've always respected you. His words made my throat tighten in a way nothing else had. After dinner, as we cleared the table, Tyler asked what I had expected. Is this because of what Madison said about the dolls? I paused, rinsing a plate. It's because that moment showed me exactly how they see me, and I can't unsee it. Some things once revealed can never be unseen. The first signs that my family had discovered the sale came at 11:23 p.m. 3 missed calls from David. 7 frantic texts from Madison. The last one was in all capital letters. Please tell Memmy this isn't true. I silenced my phone and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The next morning, David showed up at my apartment, still in his running clothes, red-faced and sweating. What the hell are you doing? He snapped as soon as I was up in the door. Good morning to you too, I said, stepping aside. Coffee? I don't want coffee. I want answers, Jennifer Maxwell. A private sale? Weeks before Madison's wedding? I poured myself a cup, stirring in cream with quiet composure. Yes, I'm simplifying my life. You're sabotaging your own granddaughter's future. My house, I reminded him gently. David ran a hand through his thinning hair. We've sent invitations, made deposits. The venue can't be changed now. Then I suggest you start looking for alternatives. He stared at me, disbelief simmering into rage. This is because of that party, isn't it? What Madison said, she was joking, Mom, you're overreacting. I looked at him over my coffee cup, seeing clearly now what I hadn't wanted to see for years. This isn't about one comment, David. It's about years of behavior, yours included. What are you talking about? The brochures for retirement homes, the meetings with financial advisors I wasn't invited to, the attempts to access my accounts. He opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. I'm in trouble, Mom, he admitted, his voice suddenly quieter. The Westridge project collapsed. Investors are threatening to sue. If I don't find capital. So this is about money. No, it's both. We're worried about you too. But you didn't ask how I was doing. You made plans behind my back. That's not concern. That's control. He looked away. The house closes in 5 weeks, I said, and the money will go into new accounts. Ones you won't be able to touch. You'd do this to your own family. I walked to the window and looked out over the skyline. You already did. I moved into the Cambridge condominium on a rainy Thursday afternoon. It was nothing like the beach house, no waves crashing outside, no salt in the air, but it was mine. Clean lines, big windows, modern everything, and quiet. That kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just peaceful. 2 days later, Tyler came over with a bottle of wine and a small gift bag. A housewarming present, he said, handing it to me with a shy smile. Nothing fancy. Inside was a framed photograph. The beach house at sunset, golden light spilling through the windows, waves brushing the shore. It's beautiful, I said, touched. I took it last summer. I always thought that moment captured something important about the place. I glanced around my new space. You know what's strange, he said, settling into the sofa. You seem lighter here? Happier. I am, I nodded, because no one else's expectations are pressing down on me. We ate dinner, pasta, and garlic bread, and Tyler shared news I hadn't heard. My photography business is actually picking up. 2 galleries are interested. I'm thinking of focusing on it full-time. That's wonderful, I said. You've always had the eye for it. He hesitated. I haven't told Dad yet. About the business, or about the check you gave me. Don't worry, I smiled. He won't hear it from me. As he helped clear the dishes, I touched his shoulder. You're the only one who saw me, Tyler, the only one who looked past what I could give. He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened. That night, I stood by the large windows watching lights flicker on the Charles River. I waited for the inevitable messages from Madison, from David, from Claire. They came just after midnight. Voicemails, texts. David's tone was cold. We need to manage this fallout. Claire's message was brittle. You've hurt this family more than you know. Madison's, of course, was the loudest. 16 messages ending with, my life is ruined and it's your fault. I turned the phone face down and went to bed. No one asked how I was. But for once, I didn't need them to. A few days later, Judith called me out of the blue. I ran into Madison at Bloomingdale's, she said, skipping pleasantries. She was returning wedding gifts. I sat up straighter, and she looked awful, Elaine, not just sad, broken. When she saw me, she cried right there in housewares. That image lingered in my mind far longer than I wanted it to. Madison in tears, surrounded by platters and toasters meant for a future that had disappeared. Later that day, Tyler confirmed it. Logan ended the engagement. His parents pulled support. Madison hasn't left her apartment in days. I wanted to feel vindicated. I didn't. Instead, I felt something that surprised me, guilt's quiet cousin, reflection. Was I any better than they had been? They dismissed my worth. I responded by erasing their plans. Had we all just been hurting each other louder and louder? That evening, David called. She's not well, he said. I know you're angry, but I'm asking, please call her. She won't see a therapist. She says it's admitting defeat. She needs help. I know, he said softly, but she won't hear it from us. After the call, I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I typed a message. Would you like to meet for coffee? Her reply came minutes later. Why, so you can gloat? No, so I can listen. There was a long pause. Then, fine, Cafe Darien, 2 p.m. I arrived early and chose a quiet corner table. Madison walked in exactly on time, sunglasses covering half her face despite the overcast sky. When she removed them, her eyes were red, her cheeks pale. You look terrible, I said before I could filter myself. She laughed a dry, cracked sound. Thanks, Grandma. Always comforting. I didn't mean it that way. I know, she said, stirring her untouched coffee. Logan's already dating someone else. Instagram official, 3 weeks after the breakup. I'm sorry. Are you? Yes, I said honestly. I didn't want this for you, but I also didn't want to be discarded. She met my eyes then. Really met them. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between us, not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe understanding. We sat in silence for a while after that. Then Madison spoke again, her voice low. You sold the house. You knew what that would do to me, to everyone. I knew there would be consequences, I said, but I didn't do it to hurt you. Then why? Because I finally realized something, that house had become more important to all of you than I was. She didn't respond right away. Her hands trembled as she lifted her cup. You humiliated me, she said. That party, it was the most important day of my life. And what was it for me? I asked gently. Do you know what was inside that doll you threw away? Her head snapped up. What? There was a diamond. My grandmother's. Reset by your grandfather for our 50th anniversary. Madison's mouth opened, but no words came out. You never even looked, I said. You just saw something handmade and decided it wasn't worthy of your attention. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I know. After we parted, I didn't expect to hear from her again soon, but 3 days later, she showed up at my door. She held a small paper bag in both hands. I found them, she said. The dolls, they were in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. I thought I'd thrown them away. But she trailed off and stepped inside. We sat at my kitchen table. She pulled the dolls out and placed them gently between us. Then, with careful fingers, she opened the seam in the female doll's chest. The diamond was still there. She stared at it as if it were glowing. I don't deserve this, she whispered. It was never about deserving, I said. It was a gift. She pushed the doll toward me. I can't keep it, not now. But I needed you to know I found it, that I understand what I threw away. I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. I'm in therapy now, she added, her voice small. It's helping. I'm glad. I'm not ready to talk about everything, but maybe one day. I'll be here, I said. After she left, I sat for a long time holding the doll. The yarn had flattened, the colors had dulled, but it was intact. And so somehow was I. 1 year after Madison's birthday party, I hosted a small gathering in my Cambridge condo. The guest list was modest. Tyler, now thriving in his photography business, arrived with his partner, Emily. Richard came alone, no longer the man he once was, and strangely more at peace. Judith was there, of course. So was Marcus, my lawyer-turned-friend. And then near the end of the evening, Madison walked in. She carried a bouquet of autumn flowers and kissed my cheek. Happy housewarming, she said. Belated, I know. My home looked different than any place I'd ever lived. Gone were the heavy antiques and faded curtains. In their place, light, color, and simplicity. Tyler's photographs lined the walls. Every piece had a story. Every corner felt like mine. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Richard spoke about his work at a nonprofit legal clinic, earning far less but doing work that mattered. Madison, quieter but more centered, mentioned returning to graduate school. Art history, she said, what I was studying before I got distracted. After dessert, Tyler raised his glass to Grandma Elaine, who taught us that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Madison added, and that true value isn't always on the surface. Later, as guests gathered coats and said their goodbyes, Madison pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, reaching into her bag. It was a small velvet box. Inside sat the diamond, now reset into a delicate silver pendant. I know you said I could keep it, she said quickly, but I had it reset for you. I think you should wear it, not hide it away for someone else's future. I lifted the necklace from the box. It sparkled in the soft lamplight. It's beautiful, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison smiled, eyes bright. When you sold the house, I was angry, but it made me confront a lot of things about who I was pretending to be and who I want to become. We stood in silence for a moment. Then I fastened the pendant around my neck. After everyone left, I walked to the balcony. The Charles River shimmered below, city lights reflecting off its surface. The beach house was gone. The family I once knew had fractured, but what remained, what had been rebuilt, felt real. Not perfect, but true. And mine.
The parking lot was almost empty, the kind of silence that made every sound echo. Mabel Cole, 65 years old, walked toward her old sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. Her hands carried the weight of a long day at the office. She unlocked the door, ready to sit down, when a small cold hand suddenly covered her mouth. Her heart jumped. For a split second she thought she was being attacked, but then she heard a trembling whisper. "Grandma, don't say a word, they might be listening." Mabel turned in shock. In the back seat, crouched low, was her 10-year-old grandson Carter. His wide eyes glowed in the dim light, filled with both fear and determination. He looked far older than his years, as if he had just seen something no child should ever see. She slid into the driver's seat, still shaken, and whispered back, Carter, what are you doing here? You scared me half to death. Carter leaned closer, his voice barely audible. Grandma, I heard them talking upstairs. Mom and Miss Jenkins. They were talking about you. They said you would sign papers and then you'd have nothing left. Mabel froze, the keys slipping in her trembling hand. For a moment the world seemed to tilt. The people she trusted most, her own daughter-in-law and her loyal assistant, plotting against her. The betrayal cut so deep she could hardly breathe. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. Carter's hand clung to hers, small but firm. The warning had been delivered. Nothing would ever be the same again. Mabel Cole was no ordinary grandmother. At 65, she carried herself with quiet strength, the kind that came from decades of sacrifice and relentless hard work. When her husband passed away many years ago, she did not collapse under grief. Instead, she poured every ounce of energy into building Cole Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company that had become both her life's work and her family's legacy. She had one son, Daniel. From the time he was a boy, she imagined him one day taking over the company, continuing the dream she and her late husband had begun together. Daniel, however, was different. He loved technology, travel, and quick opportunities. He worked remotely most of the time, often buried in projects overseas. Though he loved his mother, he was rarely around, leaving much of the day-to-day business in the hands of others. And then there was Rebecca, Daniel's wife, Mabel's daughter-in-law. To the outside world, Rebecca was the picture of charm. Her smile was warm, her voice calm and reassuring. She always called Mabel Mom with a sweetness that seemed genuine. Neighbors admired her, colleagues praised her. Even Mabel, at first, believed she was a blessing to the family. But beneath that polished exterior, seeds of ambition had begun to grow. At Mabel's side in the company was Caroline Jenkins, her longtime assistant. Caroline had started as a secretary fresh out of college, and over the years became almost like family. She knew every contract, every balance sheet, every deal that had kept Cole Industries alive through tough times. Mabel trusted her without question. That trust now hung in the balance. The final figure in Mabel's circle was Mr. Thompson, the family's lawyer. He had handled everything from property deeds to wills. He was reliable, or so Mabel thought, though recently his hesitation and nervous glances suggested a man caught in something larger than paperwork. Life had settled into a pattern. Daniel was away, Rebecca helped with company meetings, Caroline handled the details, and Mr. Thompson oversaw the legal side. To most people, it looked like a strong, well-organized family business, but Mabel felt the undercurrent, the little hints that something was shifting. Rebecca had begun pressing harder about legal documents. Mom, she would say sweetly, why don't you let us handle the stress? Just sign a power of attorney. That way the company can run smoothly while you rest. The words sounded kind, but there was a chill beneath them, one Mabel could never quite shake. Carter's small fingers clutched Mabel's hand as if it were the only anchor keeping him safe. His voice shook, but his eyes told her he was certain about what he had heard. They said you'd sign everything without even reading it. They laughed, Grandma. They called you dumb. The word stung more than she could admit. Mabel had survived decades of sleepless nights, business risks, and personal sacrifice, and yet in the mouths of her daughter-in-law and trusted assistant, she was reduced to a fool. She wanted to dismiss it, to believe Carter had misunderstood, but the way his little body trembled left no room for doubt. Tell me exactly what you heard, she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. Carter's lips quivered. Mom said once you signed the company, the house, everything would be hers. Miss Jenkins told her not to worry, that the lawyer was already on their side. They said you'd be gone soon. The silence that followed felt like a storm building in her chest. Mabel thought of Rebecca's warm smile, of Caroline's loyal years, of Mr. Thompson's careful advice. Could all of it have been a mask? She tightened her grip on Carter's hand. You're very brave for telling me this, she said softly. But we can't let them know you heard. Promise me, Carter, not a word to anyone else. He nodded quickly, his eyes brimming with tears. I promise. Mabel forced a calm breath, though her insides burned with betrayal. This was no longer about documents or contracts, it was about survival, hers and Carter's. She could not afford to be impulsive. She had to be careful, calculating, patient. As the dim glow of the parking lot flickered across the windshield, Mabel felt the weight of Carter's warning settle into her bones. The boy had uncovered something terrible, and now they were bound together in a secret too dangerous to ignore. That night, sleep would not come. Mabel lay awake, Carter's frightened voice echoing in her ears. By morning, the lines between suspicion and certainty had blurred. She could not dismiss what her grandson had told her. Too many small details already pointed toward betrayal. At breakfast, Rebecca floated into the kitchen with her usual grace. Her smile was as polished as ever, her tone honeyed. "Mom, you look tired. You really should let me take over some of the business stress. I can handle it. Just sign those papers Mr. Thompson prepared, and you'll finally have peace." Mabel forced a polite nod, masking the storm inside. Across the table, Carter kept his eyes lowered, his spoon clinking softly against his cereal bowl. The boy didn't dare look up, but Mabel could feel the tension radiating from him. He, too, knew the mask Rebecca was wearing. Later that afternoon, Mabel replayed the meeting in her mind. Rebecca had insisted, over and over, on the power of attorney. Caroline had sat beside her, nodding silently, avoiding eye contact. Mr. Thompson had fumbled with his notes, answering direct questions with vague phrases. It was as if they had all rehearsed their roles in a play, each one hiding a darker script. Unable to endure the suffocating atmosphere of her own home, Mabel drove Carter to a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The place smelled of coffee and cinnamon, a quiet refuge against the chaos pressing in from every side. They sat in the back corner, Carter holding a steaming cup of hot chocolate between both hands, while Mabel sipped her black coffee. "Grandma," Carter whispered, leaning across the table, "Mom told Miss Jenkins you're too tired to notice anything, that you'll just trust her and sign whatever she gives you." She laughed when she said it. Mabel's stomach turned. For years she had believed Rebecca's sweetness. For years she had opened her heart in her home. Now, each word from Carter was another knife twisting deeper. She reached across the table, resting her hand gently over Carter's. "We must be careful," she said, steady but quiet. "If they believe we suspect anything, we lose. Do you understand?" Carter nodded, his wide eyes full of fear but also trust. Mabel realized then that this child was her only ally in a house full of shadows. The following day, Mabel decided she could not fight this battle alone. She needed someone who had no ties to Rebecca, Caroline, or even Daniel. Someone she could trust with both her safety and Carter's. Her mind went back to the old days at Coal Industries, when the front doors were always guarded by a man named David Miller. David had been with the company for nearly 15 years before retiring. He was steady, quiet, and fiercely loyal. More than once he had walked Mabel to her car late at night, reminding her that not every kind of danger wore a mask of politeness. If there was anyone who would stand by her now, it would be him. She called him from the cafe's payphone, avoiding the house phone in case someone was listening. When his familiar voice answered, the knot in her chest loosened just a little. "Mrs. Cole," he said warmly, "it's been too long. What can I do for you?" Within the hour, David arrived at the cafe. His shoulders were still broad, his eyes sharp with the kind of alertness that never really fades. Mabel explained only what she dared, careful not to reveal Carter's role. She told him she suspected foul play, that documents were being forced upon her, that she needed someone to watch the house discreetly. David listened, nodding slowly. When she finished, he leaned forward. "I'll help you, Mrs. Cole. And I'll keep an eye on Carter too. But you must be careful. If what you suspect is true, they won't hesitate to push harder." That evening, as David circled the neighborhood, Mabel noticed something chilling. A black sedan was parked just a few houses down from hers, its engine off but its lights faintly glowing. It had not been there before. Carter pressed closer to her side, whispering, "Grandma, someone's watching us." Mabel's stomach sank. The game had already begun, and the walls were closing in. The following evening, Rebecca announced she would make dinner herself. She moved around the kitchen with the elegance of a hostess preparing for honored guests. The smell of roasted beef and garlic filled the house, warm and familiar. To anyone else, it would have been comforting. To Mabel, it felt like a trap. She sat at the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching every move Rebecca made. Carter slipped into the kitchen quietly, his small eyes alert. He leaned close to Mabel and whispered so faintly she barely heard, "Grandma, I saw her pour something from a folded piece of paper into the stew." Mabel's chest tightened. She forced her face to remain calm, nodding as though Carter had simply told her a joke. Rebecca approached the table with a glowing smile, carrying the dishes as if nothing in the world could be wrong. "Mom, you work too hard," Rebecca said sweetly. "Tonight you just relax and enjoy. I made this special for you." Mabel took her plate, raising her fork with steady hands. The food looked delicious, the aroma strong, but beneath it lingered something faintly bitter, a scent she recognized from years ago's sleeping pills, the kind her own mother once used. She cut a small piece, lifted it to her mouth, and forced herself to chew slowly. All the while she kept her eyes on Rebecca, who watched every bite too carefully. After a few moments, Mabel smiled politely. "It's wonderful, dear. You really outdid yourself." Then she pressed her napkin to her lips, excused herself quietly, and walked to her room. Behind the closed door, she spat the food into the trash, rinsed her mouth, and steadied her shaking hands. Minutes later, Carter slipped in through the side door. His eyes were wide with fear. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew she was trying to make you sick." Mabel knelt, holding his shoulders firmly. "Listen to me, Carter. You must never let her see you're suspicious. Pretend everything is normal. Promise me." He nodded, though his lips trembled. Mabel hugged him close, her heart breaking at the thought. Her daughter-in-law had crossed a line, and now the danger was undeniable. 2 nights later, Mabel stepped out into the garden for some air. The house was quiet, yet she caught the soft sound of someone weeping. Following the faint cries, she found Caroline Jenkins, her longtime assistant, sitting on the stone bench under the old oak tree. Caroline's shoulders showed, her face buried in her hands. "Caroline," Mabel said gently, "what's wrong?" Caroline startled, quickly wiping her tears. "Oh, Mrs. Cole, I'm sorry. I didn't want anyone to see me like this." Mabel sat beside her, studying the woman she had trusted for decades. "I've known you too long to believe this is nothing. Tell me." Caroline hesitated, her lips trembling. At last she whispered, "It's my daughter, Anna. She's sick, very sick. They told me she has a rare heart condition. The bills are impossible, and if I don't cooperate, they'll stop her treatment. Rebecca promised everything would be paid for, but only if I help." The words struck Mabel like a blow. A mother's fear, a child's life, this was the chain Rebecca had wrapped around Caroline's neck. But deep down, Mabel's instinct screamed. Something about the story didn't fit. She had never once heard of Anna's illness before. "Caroline," Mabel said softly, "do you have the hospital papers?" Caroline nodded, pulling a folder from her purse with shaking hands. Mabel glanced through it, her sharp eyes catching irregularities. The doctor's signature looked photocopied, the hospital letterhead slightly blurred. Something was terribly wrong. "Where did these come from?" Mabel pressed. "They were delivered by courier," Caroline whispered. "I never even saw the doctor." Mabel closed the folder, her decision firming. Rebecca had fabricated an illness, forged documents, and preyed on Caroline's love as a mother. It was manipulation of the cruelest kind. And now, Mabel knew she held a weapon, proof that Rebecca's schemes were deeper and darker than she had imagined. The morning of the board meeting arrived with an air of false celebration. Rebecca had arranged everything, from the catered breakfast to the carefully stacked contracts that waited at the head of the long mahogany table. To any outsider, it looked like a normal corporate gathering. To Mabel, it felt like walking into an ambush. Mabel entered the room slowly, Carter's warning heavy in her mind. Caroline sat near the end of the table, her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, shuffled papers nervously, avoiding eye contact, and Rebecca, glowing in her tailored suit, welcomed everyone with the charm of a queen certain of her crown. "Mom," she said brightly, "today will be a turning point for the company. All you have to do is sign, and we can carry the legacy forward together." Mabel forced a small smile, her eyes sweeping across the room. She lowered herself into the chair at the head of the table, the very seat she had occupied for decades. The pen gleamed beside the documents. As Rebecca launched into her speech about efficiency and the future, Mabel caught Caroline's trembling gaze. Caroline shifted in her chair, as though the weight of the secret she carried had finally become unbearable. When Rebecca slid the documents across the table, urging Mabel to sign, Caroline suddenly stood. Her voice broke. "Stop. I can't let this go on." She reached into her bag with shaking hands and pulled out a small USB drive. Rebecca's face drained of color. "Caroline, what are you doing?" With trembling fingers, Caroline handed the USB to Mabel. This has everything. The recordings, the threats, the truth. I can't live with the lies anymore." Rebecca lunged forward, but before she could snatch it away, the boardroom doors swung open. David Miller stepped inside, tall and unyielding, blocking her path. His presence froze the room. Mabel inserted the USB into the projector. A crackling recording filled the boardroom. Rebecca's voice, sharp and venomous, echoed through the speakers. Once she signs, the house, the company, it's all mine. If Caroline resists, her daughter's treatment ends. I'll make sure of it. Gasp rippled across the table. Mr. Thompson sank into his chair, defeated. Caroline buried her face in her hands, sobbing. And Rebecca, her mask of sweetness shattered, stood exposed in front of everyone she had manipulated. "You think they'll believe this?" she spat, her voice wild. "You think anyone cares about a tired old woman clinging to her company?" Before Mabel could respond, the door opened once more. Carter entered, clutching the arm of Margaret's old friend Martha, who had called the police. Two uniformed officers stepped in behind them, their presence sealing Rebecca's fate. Mabel rose slowly, her voice steady. "It's over, Rebecca. You wanted my signature, but instead you signed your own downfall." Rebecca's face twisted with fury as the officers placed her in handcuffs. The room, once filled with tension, now buzzed with the undeniable sound of justice. The boardroom emptied slowly after Rebecca was taken away, leaving only a heavy silence behind. Mabel remained seated at the head of the table, her hand resting on the worn wood, as though she were holding on to the very foundation of her life. Carter slipped into the chair beside her, his small hand curling around hers. The boy's courage had carried them both through the storm. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his voice low and weary. "Mrs. Cole, I should have spoken sooner. Rebecca pressured me, threatened my reputation, promised me rewards if I complied. I was weak." His shoulders slumped as if the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. Unprepared to face the consequences. Mabel regarded him for a long moment, disappointment lining her face. "You will answer to the law, Mr. Thompson. But perhaps the truth you told today will count for something." Later that week, news came that the black sedan watching Mabel's home was tied to Rebecca's old accomplice, a man she had hired to falsify medical documents. His arrest confirmed what Mabel already suspected: Caroline's daughter had never been sick at all. The story of illness was a cruel fabrication, another tool Rebecca used to control and manipulate. When Caroline heard the truth, she broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I betrayed you, Mabel. I betrayed myself, all because I thought my child was in danger." Mabel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You were a victim too. What matters now is what you do next." Daniel, meanwhile, was devastated. He had defended Rebecca for years, blind to her ambition. Standing in his mother's office, he whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't see who she really was. I should have protected you." Mabel pulled her son into her arms, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't change what happened, Daniel. But we can choose to rebuild from here." For the first time in weeks, Mabel felt the faint stirrings of hope. The nightmare was ending, and though the scars would remain, the truth had finally come to light. Weeks passed, and the dust of the storm began to settle. The headlines no longer screamed Rebecca's name. Court proceedings moved forward, with her facing charges of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. For Mabel, it wasn't victory she felt, only a deep ache that something as sacred as family had been twisted into betrayal. Carter remained her constant shadow, his presence a reminder of what truly mattered. Every morning he would run into her room, his laughter echoing like sunlight cutting through fog. "Good morning, Grandma," he'd say, and Mabel would feel her heart soften. Despite the wreckage, there was still love to hold on to. Caroline, free from Rebecca's threats, returned to Mabel not as an assistant but as a friend seeking redemption. She worked with renewed devotion, determined to rebuild trust. Mabel saw in her the courage of a mother who had been misled but still chose truth when it mattered most. "Mistakes don't define us," Mabel told her one evening. "What we do after does." Daniel, too, changed. He no longer let ambition blind him. Instead, he sat in the office with Mabel, asking questions, listening, eager to learn. In his eyes she saw regret but also growth. "I was wrong, Mom," he admitted quietly. "But I want to be better, for you, for Carter." His words were not just an apology, they were a promise. In a quiet moment, Mabel stood by the rose bushes she had planted years ago with her late husband. She thought of the nights she had almost given in, the papers she nearly signed, the sedatives hidden in her food. She thought of Rebecca's sweet voice that masked venom, and of Carter's trembling hand clutching hers in the dark. And she whispered to herself, family is not blood alone. It's loyalty, it's courage, it's love that survives betrayal. Looking at Carter chasing butterflies in the garden, Mabel knew she had chosen the harder path, the path of truth. And though it had cost her dearly, it had saved the very soul of her family. As I sit here today sharing this story with you, I know it is more than just my family's journey. It is a reminder of how betrayal can wear the mask of love, how those we trust most can sometimes be the ones who wound us the deepest. But it is also proof that courage, even from the smallest voice like Carter's, can change the course of everything. Mabel's strength was not in never being afraid, but in facing fear head-on, refusing to be silenced, and choosing to fight for truth. Carter's bravery reminded us that even a child can carry wisdom beyond their years. Caroline's struggle showed that sometimes good people are trapped in terrible lies, yet redemption is possible when honesty finally wins. And Daniel's regret taught us that relationships, even broken ones, can begin again if we are willing to face the truth. To anyone listening who may feel trapped, whether by toxic relationships, manipulation at work, or betrayal at home, remember this: silence protects the betrayer, not the betrayed. Speaking out may feel terrifying, but it is the only way to reclaim your voice. I want you to ask yourself, if you were in Mabel's shoes, what would you do? Would you risk peace for truth? Or would you dare to face the storm to protect those you love? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I love hearing your perspectives, your stories, your lessons, because every story shared is another light in the dark for someone else. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with a friend who may need the reminder, and subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories that reveal both the pain and the strength within families. Until next time, remember, betrayal may shake us, but it cannot break us if we hold on to truth and love. The day I walked into that courtroom, my daughter rolled her eyes at her husband, as if I were nothing more than an old nuisance who had overstayed her welcome. But then something happened that neither of them expected. The judge, a man I had never met in my life, stopped mid-sentence when his eyes landed on me. The room fell into complete silence. Hannah and her husband Victor froze, their faces draining of color. And then the judge spoke my name with a look of disbelief. "Ms. Reynolds," he said slowly. "You are really here." In that instant, the entire balance of the room shifted. The power my daughter thought she held over me dissolved, and the truth was about to unfold. My name is Anita Reynolds. I am 70 years old, and for most of my life I believed I was simply an ordinary grandmother living in Austin, Texas. My mornings followed a rhythm as steady as the sunrise. At 5:30 I would put the kettle on, and pour steaming coffee into the chipped anniversary mug my late husband Robert gave me on our 30th year together. That mug was never just ceramic, it carried the warmth of his memory into every single day. After coffee, I would slip into the garden shoes Robert left by the back door and step into my small yard. Orchids lined the windowsill, each one blooming under my careful hand. I would water them slowly, watching the first rays of light spread across the kitchen window. Those quiet rituals kept me grounded. They reminded me that even in the simplest of mornings there was meaning, history, and the lingering touch of a man who had loved me well. For nearly 50 years my world revolved around one purpose: raising my only daughter Hannah. I worked wherever I could find a wage. During the day I scrubbed office floors as a cleaner. At night I stitched torn sleeves and hemmed dresses at the small sewing machine Robert bought secondhand for me. On weekends I stood at a corner stall selling tamales and homemade pies, hoping each sale would push us one step closer to giving Hannah the education and future I never had. Robert often reminded me that love is proven in sacrifice, and together we gave everything we had. We celebrated every report card, every graduation, every little milestone like it was a victory for all of us. When Robert passed away, I believed Hannah and I would hold tighter to each other. I imagined Sunday dinners filled with shared grief and tender comfort. I could not have been more wrong. Distance crept in, and warmth began to fade. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Hannah and Victor arrived without warning. Victor walked in first, as if he owned the place, and dropped into Robert's old chair with the television remote already in his hand. That chair had been my husband's spot for decades, worn smooth by his steady presence, and now Victor lounged in it without so much as a greeting. Hannah followed behind him carrying a slim folder. She set it down on the coffee table with a practiced calm that felt rehearsed. "Mom," she began, "this house is too big for you. You cannot possibly maintain it on your own. We have found a wonderful senior residence. They have activities, nurses, and plenty of people your age." I tried to respond, my voice shaking. "But this is our home, Hannah. Every memory of your childhood is built into these walls." Victor did not even glance at me. "Memories are not in walls, Ms. Reynolds," he muttered while flipping through channels. "They are in your head." The words cut through me sharper than any blade. I realized then that their plan was not about safety or care. It was about possession, My house had become their prize. From that day forward, the pressure grew heavier. Realtors began showing up at my door, invited not by me but by Hannah and Victor. They strolled through my living room with clipboards, measuring the space as if I had already been erased. Strangers discussed renovation potential while I stood quietly in the corner, invisible in my own home. Boxes appeared in the hallway, labeled with neat handwriting: donate, storage, trash. My life was being sorted into categories without my consent. Hannah lifted the blue dress I wore to Robert's funeral and placed it into the donate pile as though it had no story left to tell. Then came the moment that split my trust completely. She reached for the small carved jewelry box Robert gave me on our first anniversary. Inside rested a pearl necklace from my mother, a piece I treasured. Hannah slipped the box into her handbag. "This is safer with me," she said softly. It was not safety I saw in her eyes, it was greed. That night the house felt emptier than ever. I sat alone in my bedroom, the silence pressing against me like a heavy weight. Tears rolled down my cheeks, not only for what I was losing but for the daughter I thought I knew. For a moment I felt as though I had already been buried under their plans, dismissed and forgotten. But then something shifted. I wiped my face and looked straight into the mirror. My voice, quiet yet firm, broke the silence. "I will not go quietly. If they want to fight, they will find me ready." The next morning Hannah insisted on cleaning out Robert's office. That room had been left untouched since the day he passed, and it still carried the faint scent of his cologne. When she stepped outside to bring in more boxes, I closed the door behind me and turned the lock. My eyes scanned the bookshelves Robert kept so meticulously. That was when I noticed it. Behind a row of old encyclopedias sat a small square panel, barely visible. My hands trembled as I pulled the books aside. A safe, built right into the wall. I tried every number that made sense: our wedding date, Robert's birthday, Hannah's birthday. Nothing worked. My chest tightened with frustration until one memory surfaced: the rainy afternoon when Robert and I first met, sheltering beneath the striped awning of a bakery. My hands dialed that date, and to my astonishment the lock clicked open. Inside lay a leather portfolio embossed with Robert's initials. I opened it and froze. Deeds to multiple properties, statements from accounts I had never heard of, and certificates of stock in companies I did not know he owned. In the center was a sealed envelope bearing my name in his handwriting. "My dearest Anita," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found what I kept hidden. These assets are yours alone. Hannah will only inherit if she cares for you with love and respect. Do not doubt your strength." Among the papers was a deed to the very condominium where Hannah and Victor lived, proof that the place they flaunted as their own was actually mine. And tucked behind that deed were records of shares Robert had quietly purchased in Victor's company, enough to influence decisions about his future. My knees weakened. The power they thought they had over me had already been dismantled years ago by Robert's foresight. 3 days later I sat in the quiet office of Dr. Lauren Pierce, a woman whose reputation for precision and integrity was well known in Austin. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a steady gaze that seemed to weigh every detail without missing a single one. After scanning the documents I had carried in my handbag, she leaned back in her chair with the kind of certainty that steadies a trembling heart. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, "your husband was extraordinarily careful. Everything here is airtight. The deeds are valid, the investments properly registered, and the letter of intent leaves no room for dispute. Your daughter and her husband cannot claim what is not theirs." Her advice was simple but firm: sign nothing they place before you. Do not argue with them openly. Let them expose themselves. Meanwhile, we will build your defense. You are not powerless, Anita. You are the rightful owner, and we will prove it. From that day on, I followed Dr. Pierce's instructions with precision. I carried a small recorder in my pocket, capturing every conversation with Hannah and Victor. Their words, once sharp enough to wound, became evidence that would one day shield me. I noted each visit from strangers who walked through my home as though it were already theirs. I photographed the piles of boxes, the labels written in Hannah's neat script: donate, sell, trash. Every item that disappeared became part of my growing file. One afternoon Victor arrived with a man in a pressed white coat. "This is my friend," he said casually, "a doctor who will assess whether you can still live alone." The exam lasted less than 5 minutes. He hardly looked at me before suggesting early dementia. I kept my face calm, though my heart pounded, and quietly switched on the recorder in my lap. That recording, like every other piece of their scheme, was stored in a folder that grew heavier by the week. With each entry I felt less like a victim and more like a woman preparing for battle. On a Sunday morning, Hannah and Victor drove me across town to see the residence they claimed would be my new home. From the moment we stepped inside, dread pooled in my stomach. The air smelled of disinfectant that could not quite hide the sour scent beneath. The rooms were small, barely wide enough for a single bed and a dresser. Elderly men and women sat slumped in wheelchairs along the corridor, their eyes glazed over with exhaustion. "Look, Mom," Hannah said brightly, "they even have a television room." I peered inside to see a handful of residents staring blankly at a flickering screen. "How much does this place cost?" I asked. Victor waved his hand. "Do not worry, we will sell your house." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. 2 days later, Hannah and Victor arrived again, this time with papers in hand. "Spread these out on the kitchen table, Mom," Hannah said, her tone sharp but dressed as polite. "Just sign here and here and everything will be settled." A man in a suit stood beside them, introduced as their attorney. His nervous shifting told me otherwise. I pretended to study the pages while the doorbell rang. Victor groaned at the interruption. Expecting one of my neighbors, I opened the door to find Dr. Pierce. Behind her stood a process server and a representative from Adult Protective Services. "Good afternoon," Dr. Pierce said with crisp authority. "We are here in response to allegations of elder abuse and attempted fraud." The man in the suit paled instantly. Hannah froze mid-sentence, her pen dangling above the paper. I slid the recorder from my pocket and set it on the table. "For weeks you have pressured me," I said evenly. "You have called me forgetful, weak, incapable. Yet here is your husband admitting the stove story was invented." The APS worker examined the boxes already stacked against the walls, half my belongings sorted for disposal. The process server produced a court order forbidding removal of any more property until the investigation was complete. Then I opened the folder Robert had left for me and laid down the deeds, the bank statements, the shares in Victor's own company. Hannah's face drained of color. Victor clenched his jaw, speechless at last. The house fell silent, except for the sound of papers rustling in Dr. Pierce's steady hands. In that moment, the balance shifted for good. They knew I was no longer cornered. I was in control. The following week, Victor reached out through Dr. Pierce, his bravado replaced with uneasy formality. He wanted to negotiate. His proposal was simple. He and Hannah would leave me in peace if I allowed them to remain in their condominium for 6 more months. In return, he promised to return every item taken from my house and to issue a written statement affirming that I was of sound mind. Dr. Pierce looked at me, waiting. I thought of Robert and the years I had sacrificed for Hannah. My answer was calm and measured. "I will allow them to stay, but the rent increases by 50%, effective immediately." Victor had no choice but to accept. The man who once sat arrogantly in my husband's chair now found himself paying me for the roof over his head. 2 weeks later, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Hannah stood there alone, her eyes swollen and her hands gripping 2 cardboard boxes. "May I come in?" she asked softly. She set the boxes on the table and stepped back as if ashamed to breathe the same air. Inside were my jewelry, my photo albums, and the bundle of letters Robert had written me decades ago. "These belong to you," she whispered. "I should never have taken them." I watched her closely. Gone was the polished confidence she had worn beside Victor. In its place stood a woman stripped down to regret. "Ricardo convinced me," she said, her voice cracking. "He told me you were slipping, that you left the stove on, that you could not manage anymore. It was easier to believe him than to face the truth about the man I married." I did not rush to forgive. I let her words hang in the air. "Hannah," I said finally, "you broke something deep, but maybe broken things can be mended if we are willing to do the work." Her tears spilled over as she nodded in silence. In the months that followed, I decided that my pain could not simply sit in silence. With Dr. Pierce's guidance, I established the Robert Reynolds Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to protecting older adults from financial exploitation and abandonment. Our mission was clear: to offer legal aid, counseling, and community support for those who had nowhere else to turn. When I told Hannah about it, I offered her a position. The salary was modest, but the work was meaningful. She would live in the small guest house behind my home, a place she could call her own while rebuilding her life. This was not forgiveness, it was a path forward. Each morning she walked into the foundation office determined, sorting case files, greeting clients, and slowly proving that she wanted to change. Watching her work was both painful and hopeful, a reminder of what she had done but also of what she might become if she chose the harder road toward redemption. One afternoon, a young attorney volunteering at the foundation approached me with a heavy folder. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "I think you should see this." Inside were surveillance photographs and signed statements from several elderly women. Each story was painfully familiar: property transferred under pressure, bank accounts drained, personal treasures stolen. At the center of it all was a man using a different name, but the photographs were unmistakable. It was Victor. He had resurfaced under an alias, running the same scheme against other widows. The authorities already had an investigation underway, but they needed someone who knew him personally. They needed a witness who understood his methods, his tone, his calculated charm. That witness would be me. The courthouse was packed on the morning Victor's trial began. Reporters filled the back rows, and groups of elderly women sat together in quiet solidarity. Their faces reflected stories too similar to mine. When the guards escorted Victor into the room, he wore a tired suit that did little to hide his arrogance. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me. For a brief moment I saw fury, then the polished smile he always used to disarm people. When the judge entered, I nearly gasped. Judge Nathaniel Cruz. Decades earlier, he had been a timid clerk when I worked as a secretary in this very building. I remembered bringing him coffee late at night as he studied for exams. Now he held the gavel. When I took the stand and stated my name, his head lifted in recognition. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said softly, almost as if to himself. "You encouraged me once, many years ago?" I told the court every detail. I spoke of the boxes, the false stories about my memory, the attempt to push me into a residence, the discovery of the safe, and the proof of ownership Robert left behind. The defense tried to paint me as confused, but I countered by recalling exact moments from years ago, including the oversized navy suit Judge Cruz once wore. The courtroom fell silent. My memory, I declared, was perfectly intact. After 3 long days of testimony, the evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, financial statements, and witness accounts all pointed to the same truth. Victor was not a misunderstood man. He was a predator. Judge Cruz delivered the verdict with steady authority. "Victor Hale, this court finds you guilty of fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with full restitution to your victims." The gavel struck, echoing across the chamber. I exhaled, a weight I had carried for years finally lifting. As guards led Victor away in handcuffs, Judge Cruz glanced at me and offered a small nod. It was quiet recognition, a reminder that small kindnesses often return when most needed. The trial ended, but the work was only beginning. With Victor behind bars, the foundation grew in both reputation and reach. We opened legal clinics in nearby towns, staffed by volunteers who believed no older adult should face abuse alone. We organized social gatherings so that those who had been isolated could find companionship again. In time, we secured funding to create short-term housing for elders forced out of their homes. What began as my personal defense evolved into a mission that touched hundreds of lives. Each new case reminded me of my own journey, but it also showed me that resilience could spread, lighting the way for others who once believed they had no voice. 3 years after the trial, an envelope arrived from the state capitol. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was confirmation that the Reynolds Act had been signed into law. The bill created stricter safeguards against financial and psychological abuse of older adults, ensuring that no one could so easily be pushed from their home or stripped of their dignity again. At the Foundation's new Hall of Stories, we gathered to celebrate. Faces of those we had helped lined the walls in framed photographs, each with a short caption of resilience. In the center space, they unveiled a plaque with my name. I stood quietly, overwhelmed, knowing Robert's foresight had now become a shield for thousands. At 75 years old, I stood before an audience at the Foundation, wearing the pearl necklace that once belonged to my mother. I looked out at the faces of friends, colleagues, and elders whose lives had been touched by our work. My voice was steady. It is never too late to defend yourself. It is never too late to turn hurt into purpose. Strength does not always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with paperwork, patience, and persistence. I told them that I had nearly lost everything, yet in that loss I found a greater calling. Robert believed in preparing for the future, but he also believed in people. He believed in me. If this story speaks to you, I ask that you share it. Tap the like button so others can find it. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Your words matter, and together we can remind the world that dignity has no expiration date.